She did not come to ask for anything. She came to return what had been taken. The doors of the royal hall had never been opened for someone like her. They swung apart anyway. She was not tall. She was not dressed in silk or silver. She wore a plain gray traveling coat, worn at the cuffs, and her dark hair was pinned back in a simple knot that had begun to loosen during the long walk from the city gates. She carried a small leather satchel in her left hand, and nothing else. No escort. No announcement. No title spoken ahead of her by a herald in bright colors. Her name was Sarah Calloway, and she had walked through 3 territories in 11 days to reach this hall, and she was not going to stop now. The guards at the entrance stepped forward. That was their duty, to stop people who did not belong. Sarah met the nearest guard's eyes and said, quietly but clearly, "I have a sealed document for the king. It concerns the safety of this kingdom. I will give it only to him." The guard looked at her. He looked at the satchel. He looked behind her, at the empty corridor, searching for whoever must be accompanying her. There was no one. He stepped aside. She walked in. The royal hall of the Northern Kingdom was a long, columned room, built from black stone and pale wood. Torches burned in iron holders along the walls, and the light they gave was warm but not soft. It was the kind of light designed to make people feel watched. On most days, it worked. Today, the hall was occupied. A formal tribunal had been in session for 2 hours. 6 senior advisors sat along a carved table to the left. 12 members of the War Council stood to the right, in full dress. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform, King Dorian Ashwood sat in his chair. Not quite a throne, though everything about it communicated the same thing. He was 32 years old. He had ruled the Northern Kingdom for 6 of those years. He had the kind of face that people found difficult to read, not because it showed nothing, but because, whatever it showed, changed quickly and rarely repeated. His dark eyes moved to Sarah the moment the doors opened, and they did not move away. Standing at the king's right side, 1 step below the platform, was General Caden Vale. Caden was 35. He was the head of the king's war council, and he had earned that position the slow way, through campaigns in 4 territories, through decisions made under pressure that other men would not have made, through a kind of loyalty that did not waver when it became inconvenient. He was broadly built and quietly contained. People who did not know him assumed he was simply dangerous. People who did know him understood that the danger was the smallest part of him. He was looking at a map when the doors opened. He looked up. What happened next was something Caden would spend a long time afterward trying to understand. His knee met the marble floor before he had decided to move. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was not performed. His body simply dropped, 1 knee down, his right hand pressed briefly to the stone, the way a person might respond to something that arrived faster than thought. He was upright again in a moment, and no one in the hall was sure they had seen it correctly, but the sound of it had carried. Marble does not absorb sound. The crack of a knee against stone in a quiet room is a sound that travels. The hall held its breath. Sarah had paused in the center of the room, 5 steps inside the doors. She had not, as far as anyone could tell, been looking at General Vale at all. Her eyes were on the king. Dorian Ashwood stood slowly from his chair. He was a man who made standing look like a decision. "Who are you?" he said, "and who told you that you could walk into this room?" "My name is Sarah Calloway," she said. Her voice was steady. It was the voice of someone who had practiced what she was going to say, not because she was afraid of forgetting it, but because she had wanted to be sure she said it correctly. "My father was Edric Calloway. He was condemned by your court 14 years ago as a traitor and a spy. He died in custody 3 years after that. He was not a traitor. I have proof. I am giving it to you now." She reached into the satchel and produced a sealed document. Old paper, careful handwriting, a red wax seal that had been placed there by a dying man who had hoped, more than he had believed, that someone would eventually read what was inside. She held it out. No one moved. Then King Dorian descended from the platform and crossed the hall and took the document from her hand himself. He did not read it in the hall. He looked at the seal, turned the document over once, and then looked at Sarah with an expression that had not settled into anything recognizable yet. He said, "You will come with me. and walked toward the side door without waiting to see if she followed. She followed. The room they entered was a private receiving chamber. A table, several chairs, a single window, maps on 2 walls. Dorian placed the document on the table, but did not open it. He stood with his back to the window and looked at her for a long moment. "You walked into my hall," he said, "without invitation, without escort, during a closed tribunal." "Yes," Sarah said. "That is not something most people would do." "Most people have not read my father's letter," she said. "When you read it, you will understand why I did not think there was time to request a formal appointment." Dorian opened the document. He read it slowly. He was a careful reader. He did not skim, did not skip, did not look up to ask questions while he read. Sarah stood on the other side of the table and waited. She had become very good at waiting over the years. It was one of the things that happened when you spent your life being told that your turn had not yet come. When he finished, he set the document down on the table and pressed his fingertips lightly against the edge of it, as if confirming it was real. "This names 3 members of my council," he said. "Yes, as the architects of a conspiracy that has been running for 20 years. For at least 20 years, she said. "My father's letter covers only what he was able to document before he was arrested. I believe the actual timeline is longer." Dorian looked at her. "Your father was convicted on the testimony of 2 witnesses and a body of correspondence that was presented to the court as genuine." "The correspondence was written by the same people named in that letter," Sarah said. "My father spent 3 years in custody trying to prove it." He was not believed. There was a silence. It was not a comfortable silence. It was the kind that forms when a person who is used to being in control of a room realizes they may not be in control of the information in it. "Why did you come here yourself?" Dorian asked. "Why not send the document through a representative, or through a pack leader, or through any channel that would have been safer for you?" Sarah looked at him directly. "Because every channel I could have used runs through people who have reason to want this document to disappear. My father tried to use the proper channels. I watched what happened to him. I decided to use the only channel I was certain was not already part of the problem." "And what channel is that?" he said. "You," she said, "in person, with no one between us." Dorian was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I cannot release you. If what you have brought me is true, your life is already at risk from the people named here. If it is false, you have walked into the center of my kingdom and accused senior members of my council of treason." "I know," she said. "You are not frightened." "I am," she said. "I am very frightened, but I have been frightened for 14 years, and it did not stop me from coming here, so I do not think it will stop me from doing whatever needs to be done next." He studied her for another moment. Then he said, "You will stay in the palace under the protection of General Vale while the claims in this document are investigated. You will not leave without escort. You will not speak of this to anyone else until I tell you otherwise." "I understand," she said. "I would like a room with a lock on the inside." For the first time since she had walked through his doors, something shifted in Dorian's expression. It was very brief, and it was not quite a smile, but it was something close to recognition. "That can be arranged," he said. Caden Vale, when informed of his new assignment, accepted it without comment. He was a man of few unnecessary words. He showed Sarah to a room in the east wing, confirmed the lock worked from the inside, and told her that a meal would be sent up within the hour. She thanked him. He nodded and turned to leave. "General," she said. He stopped. "I did not ask you to kneel," she said. "I want you to know I am aware of that." Caden was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I know you didn't." He paused. "I have been thinking about it. I believe my instincts recognized something before my reasoning caught up. I cannot give you a cleaner explanation than that." "It is a very honest answer," Sarah said. "It is the only kind I have," he said, and left. In the days that followed, Sarah moved through the palace, the way she had moved through every difficult place she had ever lived. Quietly, carefully, and with full attention. She asked no dramatic questions. She created no scenes. She ate meals in her room and took short, regular walks in the east courtyard and listened, with the patient attention of someone who had spent a lifetime being underestimated, to everything that was said in her presence. People said a great deal in the presence of someone they assumed was powerless. She kept notes, small, neat notes in a second leather journal that she had carried from home. The names of servants who carried messages to rooms they had no assigned reason to visit. A scribe who paused too long outside a closed door. An advisor who left a council meeting early, and then, 20 minutes later, left the palace by the side entrance. After 9 days, she had built a second document. On the 10th day, someone tried to stop her. She had anticipated it. She had not known exactly when, or exactly how, but she had known it was coming the same way she had known, as a child, when the weather was about to turn, not from anything she could point to, but from a long accumulation of small signs that had trained her to recognize the shape of a threat before it arrived. She had set a simple, careful trap, and the man who came into her room in the early hours of the morning walked into it. He was subdued, and then secured, and then he sat in a chair in the corner of her room, while Sarah sat across from him, calm and unhurried, and asked him a series of questions. By the time Dorian arrived, alerted by the guard Sarah had told to listen for a specific knock, the man had answered most of them. Dorian stood in the doorway and looked at the scene before him for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah. "How long have you known this was coming?" he asked. 3 days, she said. "And you did not tell me." "I needed to know," she said, "whether anyone in this palace would warn him before he came." Dorian was quiet. "No one did," she said. She picked up a folded sheet of paper from the table and held it out to him. "This is a list of everyone who knew enough to warn him and did not. I believe they are the people in your court who can be trusted." He took the paper. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You have been building a case inside my palace," he said, "while under my protection." "I have been helping to build your case," she said. "The protection was yours. The work was mine." What followed after that moved quickly, because Sarah's second document, combined with her father's letter and Caden's own testimony from years of watching the men named in it, was a complete and careful thing. It left little room for argument. 2 of the 3 named council members were arrested before the week was out. The third moved faster. He called in obligations from allied territories and made a public accusation, hoping that noise and political pressure would accomplish what denial had not. He demanded a formal tribunal. He received one. Sarah stood in the same royal hall she had walked into alone 6 weeks earlier. This time the room was full, packed with observers from 6 territories, with council members, with the general and his officers. Caden stood 3 steps to her left. Dorian stood, notably, at the floor level beside her, rather than elevated on his platform. Sarah presented her evidence. She did not perform. She did not raise her voice. She walked the assembled witnesses through the documents the way a person walks someone through a room they have spent a long time learning, steadily, clearly, without hurry. When questions were asked, she answered them. When someone attempted to dismiss a piece of evidence, she produced the source it came from and waited while they read it themselves. The allied territories that the third conspirator had called on withdrew their support before the tribunal concluded. The evidence was simply too clean. He was taken into custody as the hall was still settling. Dorian, standing beside Sarah as the room slowly emptied, said nothing for a while. Then he said, "Your father would have been glad to see this." "He would have been glad someone believed him," Sarah said. "He would not have required a tribunal." Dorian nodded slowly. He raised someone who did not give up. "He raised someone who learned to be patient," Sarah said. "Giving up and being patient look the same from the outside. The difference is what you are doing while you wait." The story that spread from the Northern Kingdom in the months that followed was not a story about conspiracies or tribunals. Those things were real, and they mattered, and the people they affected did not forget them. But the story people told each other, in pack halls and market roads and late-night conversations, was a smaller one. It was about a woman who walked through the great doors of the royal hall alone, with a worn coat and a leather satchel, and the most feared general in the Northern Kingdom lowered his knee to the stone floor before she said a single word. When people asked Caden about it, he never gave a satisfying answer. He said only that his instincts had registered something true, and that he had learned to trust his instincts, and that he had not been wrong. When people asked Sarah about it, she said she had not really noticed. She had been looking at the king. When people asked Dorian, he was quiet for a moment before he answered. He said that he had watched a great many people walk into that hall over 6 years of ruling, and that nearly all of them had wanted something from him. Power, or favor, or protection, or fear. Sarah Calloway, he said, had wanted justice. He said it was the most straightforward thing anyone had ever asked of him, and the hardest thing he had ever given, and that he hoped he had not taken too long. End.